There's a really good psychologist, life coach, he calls himself the Spartan life coach. His name's Richard Grannon. I like his videos a lot. He's got a real genuine, blokey vibe to him, and I just really like the way he's quite chatty and social with how he presents quite a lot of complicated psychological issues. And I was watching one of his this morning, and he was speaking about Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher. I've actually done a little vid recently about him in terms of a scapegoat. I did a video about scapegoating, and he cropped up because he's written a book, Beyond Good and Evil. But Richard Grannon in his video this morning was talking about the relationship between master and slave, which is a power dynamic, and how Nietzsche wrote extensively about the will to power. People want to be in a powerful position, and then he wrote categories of that with the master and the slave, and how that interrelationship works. And so if as we are looking at male-female dynamics with regards to parenting, usually domestic side of things, it's a very important question. This question of power dynamics, who has ascendancy, dominance in terms of power, and finding that balance and equilibrium where it is actually equal. The socialists have a lot of difficulty, I think, holding on to equality. I don't think it's a normal state of nature, equality. There are discrepancies and differences and polarizations, and in terms of sexual intimacy and relationships, there is a power dynamic, I think, and it's a good area to explore, and how people go about getting power. And what Richard Grannon was talking about quite a lot was overt narcissism, which is sort of leveled at men now, is penned as a masculine problem. He is a narcissist because da 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 da, and that would suggest an overt grandiosity, arrogance, this kind of thing. Exploitative nature or attitude. Not necessarily nature, because I believe strongly that these are cultural indoctrinated problems that can be remedied and cured. We've got to get away from this holy versus evil problem and look at health and what's to be healed. And so we got a teenage problem, which is narcissism, which is this power dynamic. You're playing with power. How powerful am I? If I do this, does that make me more powerful? How can I manipulate and coerce this environment, this social dynamic, in order to gain power? You watch teenagers. I've been a teacher for 20 years, and you see it often how this dynamic plays out. And it's a healthy thing to do. Narcissism, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because it's a stage in the teenage years, more or less, where understanding about power dynamics is experimented with, and so very naturally comes this toying with narcissism, and that can get quite cruel, and hopefully in an ideal world that would pass through as a stage during the teenage years. But I think we're in this sort of zone at the moment in terms of eras and epochs where a lot of people are stuck in the narcissistic teenage sphere zone and haven't got through it. Moving through from dependency as a baby, codependency as a child, teenager, where you want independence, but you're still very much attached, bonded. Trauma bonding and attachment bonding is all very important for this kind of problem. And then you go from codependency through to independency. In terms of one person growing up, you might think that's sort of 20s, where you're getting a flat and your income, this kind of thing, you get independence, and then finally interdependence, where you realize that you're in a community and a holistic environment, and all these pecking order, keeping up with the Joneses, I'm better than you, you're better than me, richest survive, crack some eggs to make an omelette, winner takes it all, nice guys finish last, look after number one. All these narcissistic expressions kind of hopefully blend in to a much more convivial scenario. And with the Nietzsche book, going back to that, there's the slave and master dynamic, which would have been probably very much more pronounced in certain cultures. Take the Romans, for example, where they actually had slaves. How does this interaction play out? Who is bottom of the pecking order and who is top of the pecking order, and how do those psychological variables interplay with each other? And then you get to the covert area, where some power dynamics are obtained through covert, which is kind of concealed, hidden, occult methods. And this is very much the female area of narcissism. Usually, this is a generalization, the male is much more overt, ostentatious, loud with their way of gleaning or obtaining a position of power or dominance in a relationship, whether that's one-on-one relationships or group dynamics. Whereas the female, generally speaking, again, looks at a much more covert method, whereby it seems like is very, there's passive aggression. You hear about this kind of thing. It seems like they're sort of victims and meek and mild and innocent and however the nursery rhyme goes, sugar and spice and all things nice, butter wouldn't melt, all these kind of expressions, which is masking, hiding the real motivations and intentions, which aren't necessarily benevolent and convivial. To bring in a metaphor, you might think of a group of people stuck on a desert island with limited resources. They're living in scarcity as opposed to abundance. There's only so much food left, fresh water, resources are meager. Let's leave it like that, keep it general. And there's a group of people who, are stuck on this island. Their environment is dwindling in terms of resources. So pressure mounts. And in this environment, certain characteristics would come forwards because of fears, because of anxieties, insecurities, this kind of thing, that perhaps aren't natural or normal under more abundant circumstances. So on this island, we see much more competitive, cutthroat, and increasingly aggressive and vindictive, might is right, dog eat dog, narcissistic characteristics, exploitative, moving into the psychopathic area here. But all very natural for that to happen under the circumstances. And what we have is a position in our society now where individuals are taken to, counsellors and doctors and this kind of thing, and a malfunction label is put on them, such as bipolar or ADHD or codependent, borderline, cluster B, etc. All these labels are put onto individuals, assuming that there's a malfunction in that one individual. I think we got to widen this and look at this culturally. We have a sick culture. There's a really good phrase, I think, is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And let's go from the proviso that from the place that the society has a malaise, a sickness, an illness, and that we are components of that society. Therefore, naturally, we would, contract the illness. And obviously, we're not talking about so much physical ailments, or it does get there, of course, but this is much more a metaphysical, psychological, non-sticks and stones, Newtonian physics area that we're speaking about, the mental, emotional aspect, which, does knock on to the physics, but different from, say, a broken leg or something. And this sick society, in scarcity, you see it talk about like irrigation, if economics is irrigation, the water isn't getting to a lot of places, so that Maslow base of the security pyramid is flashing the warning lights, as opposed to higher up where you're getting into the sophisticated higher dimensional stuff of self-actualization. We're still on the base of the rung here in 21st century Britain. West Wales just recently announced as the poorest region of one of the poorest regions of Europe. We live in scarcity, so hoping that people are going to be empathetic to each other, live convivially and communally, interdependence, is very unlikely because of the environmental conditions, the socio-dynamics and socio-demographics. A lot of people are very, very poor, trying to scrabble together, a few breadcrumbs here and there to get through the next day, and that is creating a psychological malaise in people, an emotional malaise, and therefore spiritual and physical malaise. Suicides are high, teenage pregnancies are high, obesity, etc., etc. All these social problems, I think, can be attributed to the malaise of the society, the culture we live in. And then it becomes a question of looking at leadership. And when you get up to the leadership, you get to the administrative stuff, and here we are at the law, at the legal system. And we look at the legal system, and as opposed to prioritising the well-being of children in family environment, we're at a place where the family law system is systemically presenting itself in a very psychopathic, narcissistic way, projecting an image of putting the child first, caring, prioritising, when the opposite is in effect that they are exploiting the situation of a broken family and then creaming off thousands and thousands of pounds in profit. Law firms cropping up left, right and centre, family lawyers, it's the most profitable area of law, and it's all off the back of children as commodities. And we're at a place where the family law system goes in onto a broken home. They profit off from the relationship issues between the parents, and they cream off thousands and thousands of pounds. It's the most profitable area of law. Family law firms cropping up left, right and centre. Family law graduates coming out of college left, right and centre because there's so much money involved in it. Why is there so much money involved in it? Because these children are like commodities. They're being shoveled around to care homes and foster parents and this sort of thing. And the economic sector is billions and billions of pounds annually just here in the UK, and this is very much a global problem. Very much recommend an Argentinian documentary called Erasing Dad, which looks at this problem, and it translates, save the language differences and the cultural differences, it is identical, because this wildfire of legal abuses span the globe in a very short space of time to get to where we are now, and where the children are being ransomed, and there's a bounty almost on where these children go. And then you get into the very dark areas that these researchers move into, which is completely valid. In terms of child prostitution, moving into areas of horrific brutality, and even satanic ritual abuse. Look at Wilfred Wong's work and these kind of researchers, John Wedger, and you find out about these VIP top-end people who allegedly, moral and ethical leaders looking after us, who are committing, mind-blowingly hideous crimes on young children. And you get into what's going on with child trafficking around the world and child prostitution, and areas like adrenochrome, which is a VIP drug that comes from traumatized blood because of the adrenaline in it. But that's the sharp end of the wedge, and we're at the family law stage, and we're looking priority-wise as job number one is for your individual recovery, because when you're in a state of high tension, hyper-arousal is the phrase you hear with post-traumatic stress disorder. We'll get into that too. And complex post-traumatic stress disorder, where there's no specific one incident. It's a more chronic, spread out area of trauma that's arrived. And so hypervigilance, which is a kind of a paranoia. This creates social anxiety, which creates social isolation. Very difficult for people to understand what's actually going on, so they see you as someone to be avoided because they can't categorize you as they used to, and they're sort of innately frightened of what's going on, because they want to believe in the society and the family law system. They don't want you to rock their world by saying, it's all a sham and a farce, and you've got cognitive dissonance and you're not, seeing this properly, which is all very valid and true. And so the cognitive dissonance pushes you arm's length away from your nearest and dearest, and you become isolated, and that's where, very complicated and dangerous social problems arise, and where this kind of community and support and counselling is absolutely vital, so that that we don't increase the huge rates of suicide of people in our position. Yeah.